Inside our warm homes today, the heater runs all night, the doors stay shut, and we still complain about the cold. Out on the old plains, there was no heater, no sealed walls, and when the firewood was gone, the cold didn't rush in. It crept low across the ground, slow and heavy. I've felt nights like that, nights when the fire sinks to a thin red line, nights when breath turns white and the teepee loses its glow. Most people today would panic long before that moment. They didn't. When the fire died, they stayed calm. They trusted the simple tricks they had prepared long before the storm. No wood, no flame, still warm. So here's the real question. Why did those simple tricks work when there was no wood left to burn? When the firewood was gone, warmth didn't come from the flames anymore. It came from where you chose to stand. Out on the old plains, that choice meant everything. The ground wind was the real killer. It moved low, dragging heat off the earth faster than cold air ever came down from the sky. If you set your shelter in the wrong place, the night was already lost. The people out there understood that. They watched the wind the way others watch the weather report today. They knew it hugged the ground, slipped through gaps, and hit hardest where the land was open and flat. So they didn't fight the cold head on. They stepped out of its path. They looked for the smallest things. A low rise in the dirt, a pocket behind a frozen riverbank, a clump of brush no higher than a knee, little breaks in the land most of us would walk right past. But to them, those were windbreaks, quiet barriers, a place where the wind slowed just enough for a family to make it through the night. Set a teepee behind one of those spots and you could cut heat loss by a third. That was the difference between a fire that died in minutes and a fire that held on just long enough. No big tricks, no grand shelters, just reading the land like a map. They knew the rule. Don't stand where the wind wants to go, because out there, warmth wasn't made. It was protected. The same principle shows up in every winter skill they used. It's the same thinking behind using smoke and wind inside a storm. They didn't overpower nature, they worked with its edges. When the firewood was gone, you didn't have a real fire anymore. You had a bed of weak coals, just a slow glow on the ground. And out on the old plains, that wasn't enough to warm a teepee unless you knew how the air moved. The people there understood something simple. Heat rises, cold sinks, and wind crawls low along the ground. If you opened the wrong vent, even a handful of coals would lose their warmth in seconds. I have seen that happen. One wrong opening and the heat gets sucked straight out of the shelter like someone pulled a plug. So they worked with the teepee, not against it. They opened the high vent just enough to let the warm air pull upward, a slow draw, a natural lift. Then they kept the low vent closed tight. No gaps, no drafts. That kept the cold ground wind from slipping in and stealing what little heat the coals produced. And they always set the coals near the center, not at the edge, not by the wall. The center was the warmest part of the ground. The soil there held heat longer. Even a small coal bed could push a bit of warmth back into the earth. Ground heat, quiet heat, the kind that stays with you. In the old 1934 heat tests, this simple setup raised the inside temperature by 8 to 12 degrees, enough to turn a freezing night into something a body could stand. It wasn't about burning hotter. It was about guiding the heat you already had, letting the teepee work like a primitive HVAC system. The same idea shows up in every study of teepee design. They weren't built for looks. They were built to control air. When the fire dies, most people look up expecting the cold to fall from the air. But out on the old plains, the cold didn't fall. It rose. It came from the ground first. The earth pulled heat from your body like a slow, steady hand. If you slept straight on the dirt, you had maybe 15 minutes before the cold owned you. The people there knew that well. They treated the ground the same way we layer clothing today. One layer to block, one layer to lift, one layer to hold. They started with willow branches, thin, springy, enough to raise the body a hand above the frozen soil. That gap alone could save more heat than any blanket. Then came the mats, woven tight, A second shield, something solid between skin and earth. After that, the buffalo hide, grained side down, smooth side to the dirt. That surface pushed the cold away, and the suede side stayed up, soft, full of little pockets. Those pockets trapped warm air the same way a good jacket does. Layer after layer, branch, mat, hide. That simple stack could raise insulation by 18 to 25% in the old measurements. Not guesswork, not legend. Numbers from people who tested it. They built their ground bed before they ever lit the fire because they understood the truth. The fire warmed the air, but the earth decided whether you made it through the night. This technique shows up again and again in winter camps. It sits right inside the old list of warming methods. They didn't build comfort, they built survival. And it started from the ground up. When the last fire dies and the coals fade, there's only one heater left: your own body. Out on the old plains, people understood that better than anyone. If your body was cold before you lay down, the night was already lost. The ground would take the rest in minutes. So before sleep, they warmed themselves the only way they could. Not by sweat, not by effort, by control. They took a few slow steps around the teepee, just enough to wake the muscles, not enough to overheat. Then they pulled a long breath deep into the chest, held it, let it out slow, breath after breath, each one pushing a little heat toward the core. Then came the muscle squeeze, 10 to 15 seconds. Tighten the legs, then relax. Tighten the arms, relax again. A small pulse of warmth, a spark, just enough to raise the internal temperature without breaking a sweat. Because sweat was the enemy. Sweat in winter is a thief. It'll rob you blind. The moment your shirt gets damp, the cold owns you. The old rule was simple: don't sweat. Ever. Not before bed, not in the middle of the night, not when the fire is gone. These small movements bought them 10 to 20 extra minutes of core heat. Just enough time for the ground layers to catch it. Just enough for the hide to hold it. Just enough for the body to settle before the cold pushed back. Your body was the last furnace, the only one you could carry, the only one that didn't run out of fuel. This principle shows up everywhere in old winter camps. A bit of movement, a bit of breath, no sweat, no panic, just discipline in the dark. When the fire was gone, the air inside a teepee stopped moving. No more warm currents, no rising heat. Just cold, dry air sinking low and crawling across the ground. And that kind of cold steals warmth straight through the skin. Quiet, constant, the kind that doesn't give anything back. The people out there knew they needed a shield, not cloth, not fur, a real barrier between their skin and the wind. So they used what they had: animal fat and fine ash from the old fire. They rubbed on a thin layer of fat first. Not thick, not greasy, just enough to seal the skin, enough to slow the air from pulling heat out of the body. Then they dusted themselves with ash, light as flour, a dry coat that kept the fat in place and blocked the worst of the ground wind. It wasn't meant to look good. It wasn't decoration. It was survival. The fat held the warmth. The ash stopped the cold. Together, they cut heat loss through the skin by a quarter or more. Smithsonian notes from 1928 say 25 to 30%. That matches what people already knew in their bones long before anyone wrote it down. This small trick shows up again and again in winter accounts from the plains. Cree, Lakota. Families who lived through winters most of us couldn't last an hour in. They treated the skin like armor, not metal armor, heat armor. When you have no fire left, your skin becomes the last wall between you and the night. And out there, a thin film of fat and ash was sometimes the only thing that kept a body warm enough to see the next sunrise. When the fire was gone and the coals were barely alive, body heat became the only real warmth left in the teepee. A small coal bed couldn't carry a family through the night, but people could, if they used their heat the right way. Sleeping apart was a mistake. Spread out the warmth, bled into the ground, and vanished fast. I felt that kind of cold. It eats the heat right off your skin before you even know it's happening. The people out there learned to sleep as a unit, not for comfort, For survival, they built what you could call a thermal ring. The elders went in the middle. Their bodies needed the most protection. The children stayed close to their mothers, skin to skin, breath to breath. And the strongest adults took the outside edge. They acted like walls, human walls, holding the worst of the cold back. Some nights they stacked themselves tighter, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, a living formation, the outer bodies catching the first push of the cold, the inner bodies holding the core heat that kept everyone alive. This setup bought them 40 to 60 extra minutes before the cold broke through. That doesn't sound like much today, but out there, on a night with no wood left, that extra hour was gold. It was the difference between shivering in the dark and waking up with enough strength to go on. None of this was sentimental. It wasn't about closeness or bonding. It was strategy, a simple geometry of warmth found in many old traditions. Heat pooled in the center, cold stayed at the edge. They didn't sleep apart. They slept smart. Because out there, the family wasn't just a family, it was the shelter. When there was no firewood left, the cold wasn't the only enemy. The wind was. One gust slipping under the teepee could steal an entire night of warmth. A small shake in the hide, a loose vent, and the cold came pouring in. I've seen nights like that, the kind where a single draft feels sharper than a knife. The people out on the plains understood this better than anyone. So when the fire died, they built what you could call a cold watch, a silent defense line against the wind. The first step was simple. They packed a low snow berm around the base of the teepee. Not tall, not fancy, just a small ridge knee high at most. Snow blocks ground wind better than most folks think. That little wall slowed the crawling wind by 15 to 30%, enough to keep the base of the teepee from breathing cold air all night. Then came the dogs. They didn't sleep inside. They slept in a loose ring around the teepee. Not for warmth, for warning. Dogs sense shifts in the wind long before people do. When the wind picked up or changed direction, the animals stirred. A rustle, a shift. Just enough to tell someone inside to check the flaps or tighten a lash. And near the doorway, they set their weapons. Not for enemies, for discipline. A reminder that someone had to stay alert. Even a short doze at the wrong moment could let the wind tear open a vent and drain the last bit of heat from the shelter. None of this was dramatic. There were no shouted commands, no patrols, just quiet habits. A snow wall, a circle of dogs, a watchful mind in the dark. Warmth didn't come from the fire those nights. It came from discipline, from paying attention when the body wanted to rest, from treating the wind like a threat that never slept. This same mindset shows up in every story about blizzard nights with no heat. They didn't wait for trouble, they prepared for it, long before it arrived. When the fire drops to a thin red line, the teepee goes dark. Most people today would panic at that moment. Out on the old plains, they didn't. Warmth didn't vanish with the flame. It just moved. Some of it stayed in the ground in the willow, the mats, and the hide they laid down long before night came. Some of it stayed on the skin in the thin coat of fat and ash that kept the wind from stealing their heat. And the rest stayed between the bodies, sleeping close together. Elders in the middle, children tucked in, the strongest on the outside, not for comfort, for survival. When the wood was gone, they relied on habits, not luck. Quiet skills shaped by generations of winter. That is how they kept the night when the fire could no longer help them. Stay by the fire.